NCAA doubles title there. He is a much sought after speaker when it comes to movement, biomechanics, sports science. He's located here in Atlanta, Georgia. He at one time was with USDA player development. So Mark, where are you? Come on up. Morning everyone, how are we?
Morning.
I'm going to walk around a little bit. I was thinking we may get some people to exercise a little bit today. We're talking movement skills, we're talking coaching, we're talking 10 and under. So those are three things that work together really, really well. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, good. So it's going to be pretty interactive. So it's going to be more about what do we as coaches need to look for when we're looking at our athletes. So it's less about drills and exercises. Today's going to be a lot more about where should our eyes be, what should our motivating cues be, and how can we make sure that when the athletes are doing what they're doing, that we're making corrections that make them better. Because we know a lot of you are going to work in large groups, so how do we make sure that we give every kid individual attention in a large group setting? And that's always a challenge. We know that, we understand that. You can't give them as much attention as you would with a one-on-one, but from a movement perspective, we want to make sure that we focus on the areas that are most important, that make a difference. And can anyone tell me, we're talking 10 and under predominantly, so just call it pre-pubertal age. What are sort of the main things from a movement perspective that you all should be focusing on? Split step? What else? Center of gravity? Okay. What else?
Alignment.
Alignment. What else? Balance. Core. Core. Missing a lot. What else? Agility.
Orientation in space.
So, yeah, so kinesthetic awareness, their ability to understand their body in space. Coordination links in closely with that. Tracking of the ball or tracking of their body? Of the ball. So what else? Missing a few.
The eyes, the head.
The eyes, the head. Speed, good. What else? We should be able to rattle these off. We should be knowing exactly why we're doing the movements, the exercises, the drills. What's the purpose of everything we're doing? A couple of ones that people haven't said, which I want to bring your attention to. Strength. Recently, there's finally a lot of coaches and trainers have understood it, but it's actually a good amount of research over the last 3 years that has shifted. We all talk ABCs. Now there should be 2 S's on the end of that. It should be speed and strength. Strength's really important at the young age, and there's actually been some really good research showing that it is a window of opportunity in this space. So like everything else, we want to be training all these components. We just want to be able to prioritize them in how we do that. So keep in mind that when you're doing everything that you're doing, if it's hitting drills, if it's specific movement drills, that these components, you need to be thinking about them as you're monitoring the athletes. We're not talking forehands and backhands today so much. We're going to be talking what should we be looking at when an athlete does any type of movement. So let's start off first with, can I get a volunteer, someone to demonstrate with me? I want to walk you through sort of some basic assessments you can do to see where your kids are at, where they're good and where they're weak, and what to look for. So who wants to demonstrate early in the morning, 8:30? It won't be a lot of sweating, it'll be more flexibility right now.
Yeah.
No, there's always someone. There's always one person willing to get up. So, no problem. So the first thing you always like to do is you just want to see where is the athlete's ability to control themselves in a standard squat position. So let's start off with your arms out in front of you, and now squat down. And you can see she knows what a squat is. Usually when you do this with a 6 or 7-year-old, when they squat, their knees are going to come forward. So if you can see here, they're going to put all their weight over their toes, their heels are going to come off the ground, and they're going to do this, because that's what we told them to do. We said squat down, and that's the easiest way to do it. but it's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to move the center of mass backwards, so we have to have some coaching cues. So go down again, demonstrate incorrectly, because you're demonstrating it really well. So knees forward, there you go. Let the knees rock in, so the knees will come in. So how many of you see your kids do that? Okay, if they can't do that movement alone, we're going to run into all sorts of problems every time we ask them to land. So landing is something that a lot of us maybe don't focus on enough, because we're thinking, how do we get them moving better, like speed and things like that. But if we don't teach them how to land first, everything else is not going to work. And at a young age, the injury risk is not huge, but over time, this becomes a problem. So we want to make sure that the first thing we make sure we focus on is decelerating or learning how to land. Because if we learn how to land and we teach them how to land, then we can really add on to all these other components. So from a standpoint of this, let's say, and the way in a big group we would do this, you'd line all your kids up, you'd have them in a circle, you'd be talking to them at the beginning of the day, maybe talking about the lesson plan or whatever you're going to do, and you have them do 10 of these. And you're just walking around without them even realizing why they're doing it, and you're just getting a mental note of who's doing it correctly, so who's able to sit back. Now we'll sit back. So we'll ask them to bring their feet a little bit closer, because that's a normal thing that you'll see as well. Well, the reason they're bringing their feet out, wider center of base, it's a lot easier to get down. But slightly closer you bring the feet, it's a little bit more challenging. So you want to give them a cue of shoulder width apart if you start seeing them going really, really wide. So good. So can you hold that position there? That's okay. I'll protect you. So good. So from this standpoint, we've got pretty good alignment with the back, so the back's straight, which is what we're looking for. We want to make sure that the knees don't roll inwards, so you're doing a great job there. And then the arms are here for what reason? Why have we got the arms out here? Okay, partly balance and partly it's aligning the center of mass here. If we move the arms above the head, now move your arms above your head. Higher, higher again. Okay? This is a more, yeah, that's okay, I've got you. This is a more advanced exercise, and why does it make it more challenging? You've shifted your center of mass higher. So your center of mass now has moved from being pretty much above your belly button to nearly being at your chest. Okay, relax. So that's a really good way to pick up, okay, are they pretty good when they're here and they can control their center of mass? But then the moment you put their arms up, do they fall backwards? Then if they do that, then you know anything above their head is going to be a bit of a challenge for them. Some athletes at a young age can handle that. Their awareness is pretty good. Their ability to control their body once you move their center of mass higher can work. But a lot of them can't. And that ties into, then how do you go about teaching overhead movements? Whether it's swinging volleys, whether it's serving, whether it's overheads. So understanding just that simple movement can give you a little bit of a window into how technical you can be, where the areas that you can focus on from those perspectives. So think about this more so as assessments to give you a picture of where you should focus some of your time. Okay, so the next thing we'll do, so same exercise. Does anyone have any questions on this? This is a real simple thing, but it's really, really important. So we know the kind of things we're looking for. We're looking for the knees not to roll in. If the knees do roll in, what's that telling us?
If they cannot do this,
correct,
you would send them to someone that's professional.
No, not at a young age. You guys can work through these. These are not concerns, I would say, at this point. If they're 14 or 15 and they can't do this, that's a bit of an issue. But at a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old level, this is just them having, they just don't have physical literacy. You probably talked about that a little bit. Yeah, their inability to just do basic movements. Like a 3-year-old can squat perfectly most of the time. They can get down here, they can sit, they can be here all day and feel pretty good. Yeah, when they get to 8, they can't do half of that. So we've screwed up as society of putting them in positions that have taken away their natural ability to perform a movement that they should be able to do. So yeah, I wouldn't say at this point, I'd say let's demonstrate here. So if they're weak here, there's a couple things we can do. Very simple one is, you guys have all heard monster walk, hopefully. Familiar with that? Are you familiar with that one? No? Okay. So what we'll do here, we'll start like this. We'll get as low as we can. So everyone's going to go a different depth. Your goal is to get to about 90 degrees with your hip and knee. So if you can get there, chest up, good. So it's perfect, really good position. Now, for anyone, that's not easy just to hold. So the first step is how long can they hold that pretty comfortably? Feel pretty good?
So far.
Okay, so from this position then you ask them to take a step with their right leg, push off, yeah, sideways, and then bring it back to shoulder width. And again, good, keep going, looks really good. Okay, real simple exercise, not so easy to do. If anyone thinks this is super simple, come out here and I'll show you it's not. Okay, now come back. So you want to do about 10 steps to the right, 10 steps to the left. Stay lower. As they get more fatigued, they're going to rise up higher and higher. Don't let them do that. There's all sorts of cues that we can use. You all use different language. Sometimes you use a 2x4 or a BB gun, whatever it takes to get their butt down. Okay? That kinesthetic awareness is pretty important. But you want to make sure that you do it in a way that allows them to feel what we're trying to work on. How's that feel? Okay, for you guys that are interested in the why, so what's that exercise working? There's a small muscle in the butt called the glute medius. So the glute maximus is kind of the big fleshy part of your butt. The glute medius is a muscle in there. That controls your alignment from your hip down to your knee. So if you track inwards, that means that muscle, that small muscle, is not working very well. So we need to strengthen that. This is a great way to do it. You've probably seen it with resistance around the ankle or above the knee. At this age, they don't need resistance. Most of them can't even do that. 10 steps to the right, 10 steps to the left. So we want to start with that. Once they get really good with it, then we can add some resistance. So, always good to bring toys because you never know who you get out here. You do a phenomenal job with it, so it makes it easy to add resistance.
Do my wall sits with my kids.
Exactly. So we'll put this above your knees. So put them around both ankles.
Outside.
Yep, there you go.
I'm just stepping there.
Yep, step into it. Both sides.
I don't know if it's going to stretch that far.
It'll get there.
Okay.
Okay, so go above your knees. There you go. Okay, so has everyone seen these? This is just, again, basic TheraBand tubing. Okay, so from this position, this is easier. So above the knees, make sure you don't put it on the knees. You don't want to put pressure on the knees. You want to put it sort of at the quad, and then you want them to do the same movement. So get down low. Good. And take the step. Tell me how much harder it feels.
Not too bad yet. Just give me a few.
Yeah. So she's doing a great job. Stay, keep that shoulder width apart. Good. So you want to make sure there's room there. Okay, now come back. Stay lower, as low as you can. Always give them that cue to stay lower. So different cues that you can use to make it fun for them. You give them an awareness of when they start rising up, because as we know, they don't know where their body is in space. So we have to provide them with some cues. And you all have those down. Okay, relax. Good. So that's the next progression. If they can do 10 to the right, 10 to the left without any resistance, add this. Once they can do 10 and 10 with no problem and they're not rising up, then what you do is you take the resistance down by the ankles. So we're just progressing it, making it more challenging. And again, most of the kids actually do this relatively well because they haven't grown a lot yet. So once they start getting into puberty and they hit 11, 12, 13, 14, then they really struggle with this because their center of mass is higher, their strength becomes all out of whack because their length of their bone growth. So it becomes much more challenging through puberty. When they're younger, they actually do a lot better with this movement. Go ahead, try that. Tell me if that's harder or easier.
Definitely harder. Just getting them apart.
Yet.
Just getting them apart. It's harder.
Good, nice job. Keep going. Stay low.
Not very low. I was going to say, I can feel them not low.
No, you're doing well. And usually, when you ask them, when you notice that they're stronger on one side than the other, that is going to show you a little bit whether they're going to move better to their left or their right. So if they're moving on court, hitting forehands and backhands, this can give you a window into where the weaknesses may be. Good. Okay, really nice job. Okay, so that's a real simple way to, one, evaluate, very basically, do they have enough strength to hold their body weight as their center of mass drops? And most of them are going to struggle nowadays, unfortunately. There aren't that many people that can go straight into a squat perfectly in a good position. So that's a simple exercise to add. You want to add it into your circuit, so whether you do it as part of the sort of dynamic warm-up that you may do, or when you do your circuits, have this as one circuit always. This is one of those ones that's sort of like a stable exercise that should be part of the circuits that you put together. So that was really well done. Awesome. Thank you so much. You're done for now. So from a standpoint of that assessment, that's really, really an important one. When we start taking a look at what's next, so then we start getting a bit more, that's more of a static movement. Now let's take a look when they actually have to land. Does anyone want to demonstrate? We're going to go around the room, try to get every person in the room to come up at least for 1 minute. So if you come up early, you get it over and done with. Awesome. All right, good to see you. So what we're going to do now is, are you okay? No knee problems, no hip problems? Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do now is I just want you to jump and then land. Don't even think about it. Okay, so do it again. Okay, one more time. Okay, are you all observing? Can you all see that? Let's do 3 more of those. Just want everyone to take a look. Good. One more time. Good. We didn't give any instruction. There was no put your feet here, land like this, do that. And that's really important because we want to see what people do naturally. Because there was a few things. You notice how close your feet are? So in an ideal world, when we want to teach landing, we want feet slightly wider apart, so shoulder width apart. So you want to see where their comfort zone is, and your comfort zone seemed like it was pretty close in. So you want to move them out slightly, shoulder width apart. Why do we do that? Wider base of support. Why is that important? You guys are correct. That's the reason for it, but what's the why behind it? Why do you want a slightly wider base of support?
More athletic.
Potentially. But why?
So you can load up, push up.
Yeah, exactly. The issue is we want to recruit the right muscles. So when they land, we want to make sure our big muscles are working. Our glutes are really taking that pressure. Because we know when we jump, we can add 3 to 4 times our body weight on the landing. So if you weigh 150 pounds, you may be landing with close to 500 pounds because of how high you jump and what you're landing on. You don't want all that weight going over your knees. You don't want all that weight falling through your lower back. So we want to make sure that we've got a good stable base of support when the athletes land so that they can land comfortably and there's not going to be an injury risk. But the second big thing is that they can then push off in some form of movement, whether it's laterally, straight ahead, backwards, wherever the movement's going to be. They're stable and they can take off. So teaching them how to land is huge. And so if we start that just alone, so now do a jump and land. Okay, go again. Good. Okay, so a couple of things. She's doing a really good job of demonstrating here because you want to land on sort of the balls of the feet, but then you want to rock back slightly into the heels. And again, there's a few different reasons for that. One, that's an absorption. Think of a shock absorber. So we have less pressure per square inch. Basically, what we're trying to do by absorbing more, we have less pressure per square inch on the landing. So that's a safety mechanism. However, it doesn't make you fast. So there's a balance, like most things in life. You know, it's this speed accuracy trade-off, or it's this speed injury risk trade-off. So that's the right way to land for absorption. However, the longer you spend on the ground, the slower you are. Okay, we all understand the quickest way to get from A to B is actually in the air. So we don't want to spend a lot of time on the ground. However, you've got to spend enough time on the ground that you're positioning your limbs appropriately. So it's a bit of a challenge because we want to teach first absorbing, being able to handle their own body before we teach speed. So if they can't decelerate and if they can't land effectively, just doing a lot of speed focused stuff is not going to get them to where they need to go. Because the biggest problem in tennis is not always the first or second step, It's after they've made contact with the ball, how do they stop and re-accelerate. So it's that deceleration into re-acceleration which makes the biggest difference in tennis movement. So from that perspective, we all talk about, okay, split and move into the first shot. That's great, we want to focus on that, but that's actually secondary to making sure that they learn how to land, learn how to decelerate, so that they can then re-accelerate. So if we go back into this movement, so we're doing pretty well here. Let's do a couple more jumps. Good. Okay, so we notice now she's getting a little fatigued because we've done about 15 or 20 jumps here. And she's doing a really good job, but the knees are starting to want to come forward. I don't know if you guys were seeing that. But when she was landing, the knees were doing this and then rocking back. And you're going to see that a lot because of when a lot of the time when they jump, they're jumping in this arc. So the body is moving forward. So when the body moves forward, when they come down landing, they're already sort of shifting this way. So we want to teach them when they land to land, sit back in the hips. So knees stay here, weight is back in the hips. Again, we're trying to position them in a way where they're super stable. So if we can try a couple there where we sort of land back in the hips. Good. Good. Nice. Okay, so there's an extra sort of emphasis on holding in the hips. This is a strength exercise. For a 7, 8-year-old, this is a strength, this is a jump squat, which when they think about what we talked about before, when we're adding 2 or 3 times their own body weight to a landing, this is a significant strength exercise for a lot of them. So we want to understand that this is really important. So again, one of these things when we get them to go through these movements is focusing on the right way to accomplish it. So any questions on that? Does that sort of make sense what we're trying to do here?
Not a question on that specifically, but the notion she's staying in the same plane. Do we want the children then to progress to where there's a forward? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Brooks' point is huge. It's like we're showing day one this most simple sort of landing we can do, 2 feet in a single plane, pushing the weight through the glutes, the big muscle groups. Yeah, that's sort of day one of the progression. Then we want to progress into can they land in different planes of motion? Can they land in diagonal movements? And then we also want them to be able to land on one leg. Because tennis is a single leg sport basically. Every time you run, every time you hit, you're positioning your weight over one leg more than the other. So we need to get them to the point where they can do single leg movements in multiple planes. However, most of the people that we work with can't do this effectively. So if we push them too quickly along the progression, we're going to miss important areas and they're never going to make those up, because what happens with all of us, we're always focused on performance. How do we get them better quicker? And when we think getting better quicker, that's doing more with less a lot of the time. That's running them faster, hitting more balls. That's not necessarily making them better if they've got these deficiencies that we're sort of overlooking. Similarly in the schools, just by pushing people from grade to grade without them getting the skills and abilities what they need to progress down the road, at some point they're going to be found out. And that's the same thing here. You can bluff a little bit at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and kind of work them through some of this without them really improving, because they're getting better. They're growing a little bit, they're hitting more balls, they look better. Doesn't mean they're physically getting better. And the problem from a higher performance standpoint is when their physical limitations get exposed, usually at hits about 13 to 14, then everyone struggles and they say, oh, we got to get them faster, we got to get them more stable. It's really hard at that point. So we've got to really spend the time when they're young, do it right, and it's a lot easier. They can make these adjustments in a day or 2 or 3, whereas when they're 14 or 15, it takes months, sometimes years to get them to overcome some of the limitations. So it's a really, really good point about where does this fall in the progression.
Yeah, I was listening the other night actually on sports radio, and they were interviewing Dr. James Andrews out of Birmingham, and he was saying that the amount of Tommy John surgery right now has a lot to do with, you know, these pitchers trying to throw at 90 miles an hour at a young age, and the tendon is actually not developed. It's not dense enough. I mean, at 25 and that, it's dense enough, but not at that stage. So they're redlining at 80 miles an hour, and
is not always what you're doing, it's how much you're doing. And that's the same in baseball. The baseball literature is a lot broader than the tennis literature, looking at volume. It's a little easier in baseball to measure some things. In tennis, volume's not so easy to measure because forehands and backhands aren't necessarily equivalent to serves. So we have to understand that. But again, at the younger ages, they can actually handle a lot. The 10 and under space is one of the best spaces because their volume can actually be higher than when they get to puberty. And a lot of people, when I say that, sort of question it. Well, they're young kids. Yeah, but if they're enjoying what they're doing, hey, we've all seen kids can run all day. They can run outside for 8 hours. They can play and jump. As long as they're having fun and the pressure isn't there and they're enjoying themselves, that's the environment we want them to be in. The challenge becomes when we force them into sort of movements and repetition of an environment that they're not comfortable in. That's when the issues come about. So we have to understand when the volume is who's driving the volume. Is it us as pros, or is it the parents, or are the kids excited to do it? And if the kids are excited to do it, then the volume isn't an issue. I mean, with the high performance kids, we've seen many of them where they'll practice 4 hours a day, and then in their free time they go out and play mini tennis. So that, that's a good scenario when the kids on their own go out and want to hit more. And at a young age, the injury risk because of the loading is nearly non-existent in 10 and under. Once we start getting puberty, it's a completely different discussion. So the volume at this young age is not necessarily the concern. It's when they get to puberty, so you want to make that distinction. But the biggest thing is you want to make sure that technically you guys are doing a great job, because if they have technical limitations, it's a lot easier to fix it at 7 or 8 than it is to fix it at 13 and 14. And that's when the issues are going to show up. So from our perspective, same in baseball. They're seeing 12 and 13-year-olds having Tommy Johns. We're seeing 12 and 13-year-olds having elbow and shoulder surgeries and lower back surgeries in tennis. And it's happening more and more unnecessarily. So that's something that all of us need to sort of pay attention to and make sure that we understand it.
Do you think that a lot of that also would be related to the psychological pressures? Because when you're really trying to focus on something so much harder, like you said, when the kids play, they play for fun, and there's no stress on them. But when you've got somebody saying hit it harder or push off harder, then they start tensing up. Just like if we were to do something and we start focusing on it as adults, we typically start, like you get it with all of your older players, especially like the ladies that have the gorilla grip on arms, like your arm feels like it's gonna fall off. You're gripping the racket so tight, and I think the younger kids just don't have that stress on them, or at least they're not perceiving it yet. But once they hit puberty, all of the emotions and everything makes them start tensing up as they're doing things and wanting to do the right and please their parents, of course.
No, for sure. I mean, that's the biggest thing that all of us have to sort of work within, is this, where is the drivers coming from? And how can we create the environment where it's enjoyable but they're learning at the same time? And that's the challenge, because like you said, they have pressures that we don't even know about. Especially if you're in big groups and you don't know the kids that well, they come once or twice a week. You don't really know exactly what's going on in their life. Why are they there? Do they really enjoy it? Most of you over time can pick up pretty quickly. Okay, this kid really is passionate, loves what they're doing, or no, they're just here because it's one of the 10 other things that they do that week and they get dropped off, and in a year they're probably not going to be there anymore. So that's something that you as a coach has to really work with that environment and make it enjoyable for every kid in a different way. But yeah, reducing the pressure, that if you see it, if you can do things to help reduce that, it's going to make it a much better environment and hopefully keep them in the sport longer. Okay, back to sort of some of the movement specific things. So we talked landing briefly there. So if they can land in a stable position, that's great. The next thing we want to do is we want to figure out when we take it to one leg. Can I grab you up again one more time? Can we do a one leg squat and see what happens? Because this is where everything sort of shines its light. Go ahead. Okay, so if you can see, you may not always be able to see here. Do about 5 reps if you can. So if you have a look, you can see she's done this before, so she's relatively stable, but you want to watch where that knee tracks. And the knee is gonna, usually with people that aren't super stable, the knee's gonna track inwards. And it's gonna track inwards relatively severely in people that have very poor lower body and core control. So she's doing a great job here of trying to be stable. Nice. Okay, relax. Yeah. And it's a really challenging exercise. It looks simple, but the thing is that if they can't do that at 8, they're going to really struggle once they start going through puberty. So most of the stuff that we're focusing on at this age is to prepare them for puberty. You know, we're not making great tennis players at 7, 8, 9 years old, but we can definitely screw them up for life if we don't do a good job. So it's one of those factors where if you don't do a good job at this age, the odds of them being really high-level athletes when they get older is nearly non-existent.
Is that type of exercise for the child that can't do it, that's challenged? Is it something where we want to be assistive with it? So if they learn, can you explain how, let's say I've got a child that can't really do it very well. How do I get him to be able to do it?
Sure. So it's a great point. So if they struggle with this, and there's 2 big things that you're going to see that happen. One is the knee's going to rock inwards like that. Second is their core is going to break. They're the 2 big things that you're going to see with a young kid. So that tells you 2 things. One is that exercise we did, that lateral movement, the monster walk, it's a great one because that gets them stronger in that. So that's something that ties into this movement as well. The second big thing is their ability to support themselves is limited. So one really good exercise, without going into that, there's cues that you can do during the movement to help them, to make sure that they know where they need to fire. But if they're not strong enough, here's one exercise we'll do. We'll line our back. So knees up like this. So this is just a real starting point, simple exercise. Hands over our chest. We're just going to rise up. Okay? And down. Good. Do 10 of those. Hold for 2 seconds at the top. I don't know if you guys can all stand up, take a look. Simple exercise. Looks relatively simple. What we're doing here is we're trying to get the glutes to work, to contract, and also we're trying to make sure the hamstrings start to work a little bit. Because one of the biggest limitations with all athletes is strength through that, it's called the posterior chain. Basically, your hamstrings and your glutes. If they aren't strong enough, the athletes are going to struggle with most movements. Good, okay, relax. So that's sort of progression 1. Once they can do a set of 15 like that, without really wavering, their hips don't move, they don't shift, then the next one to do, which is a little bit more challenging, bring your knee in, grab onto it, now lift up. So you're doing single leg version. Good. Go ahead. Again, hold for 2 seconds at the top, get a good contraction, make sure the glutes are firing and they're working correctly. So again, if they can do 15 on each leg, next progression, we're going to put our heel now into the ground. Now, tell me how more challenging that becomes. Feel that? So I don't know if you saw that at the back, but all we did was, instead of having the foot on the ground completely, we now only have the heel on the ground. Again, it comes down to pressure per square inch. We've just reduced the amount of support the athlete has. There's a lot more pressure now being through the hamstring and the glutes. So now we've just progressed them into a nice sequence. And for a 10 and under athlete, this is about as far as you need to go. Once we start working older, higher, stronger athletes, there's all sorts of other progressions we can take them through. But this is a nice sequence of 3 that once they get comfortable, you can just easily move them through. Really nice job. So as we stand up now, if you want to just cue them when they're doing a single leg squat, go ahead, go back into the single leg squat. Okay, so a couple of things we want to do to make it a little easier on them. Hands by the side like you are. So, and then when you drop down, only go quarter of the way. So drop down, stop. Good. So all you're doing here is going to their point of comfort and no lower. So if they have trouble when you can stand up. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them to a point of comfort and then just stabilize. Just let them stand there for 10, 15 seconds. Once they get good at this, throw balls at them, have a good time, play with their partners, different games. Add this stabilization exercise to some of the circuits that you all do. So again, make it fun. Today we're not sort of talking about how to sort of implement the drills so much. It's more about what drills do we need and what exercises do we need to add. And then all of you sort of structure your programming a little bit different. Then it's about how to structure it in your programming. So once they get to that comfort zone, have them hold there. And don't let them waver. So if they're wavering, it's too low. So then you may have to go up a little bit higher. So just go as low as they can go without them wavering. And then each day, get them going a little bit lower. And over the course of a week or two, they should be able to get down there and hold. So we should be pretty good once we walk them through it. So it's a combination approach. One, it's the exercise itself, but then we also have to strengthen what's happening around them. Perfect. So make some sense on what we're trying to do here. We get them first landing with 2 feet, making sure they can control their body weight. That's huge. The second big thing is then we got to take them to single leg, relatively static. Then once we get really good at this, then we got to see, okay, what happens when we get serious? And when we get serious, it's do they jump and do they land? Okay, we don't take them there day one. Kids can do it. They're not going to hurt themselves doing it, whereas an adult actually may hurt themselves doing that. If they're deconditioned and they haven't done a lot of exercise, and then you get them doing single leg jumps with a hold, they can do some damage. Young kids not likely to injure themselves doing a single leg jump, but we don't want to progress them there too early. We want to see where they're at in static environments, and then we want to progress them in. So you feel okay to do that? Okay, so just a small jump about a foot in front of you. Good, and then land. See, you notice the waver, it becomes a lot more challenging. The moment you add, we're just adding resistance. That's all we're doing. We're adding a little bit of resistance, we're changing the center of mass so it's moving forward. We're in a linear position. Good, do one more. Nice. And again, we're trying to get them to hold here. So be aware that this is the purpose here. We're not trying to do it for speed. We're not trying to go doubles line on doubles line as fast as you can, hopping like this. It's a different type of exercise. Here we're trying to land, hold for 2 seconds, see how stable they are. Good. Okay, so linear doesn't look too bad. Now what happens is when we go sideways. Okay. So we go this way and we see. That's good. Perfect demonstration. That's what we're trying to show. That the moment you take them outside probably what they're used to doing, they can struggle. That's normal. That's what we want to work on. We want to see where do they struggle the most.
So know what I need to work on?
This is perfect though. You're demonstrating it exactly right. Good. Exactly. This is exactly what we want to show them. And then we want to go here, here, then back. Hold, and you want to do little patterns, and once they get comfortable with it, then you can put your different markers on the court where they can jump to. You can play games, you can have scoring systems, you can do all sorts of stuff to make it interactive, make it fun, but you got to understand why you're doing it. I think that's the biggest challenge. Is there's so many good drills and exercises out there. A lot of people don't always know why they're doing it. They just saw it and they say, that's a cool drill, let's do it. Which is only half the battle, because you can do a cool drill really badly and not get the athlete better. Because if you just let them go and they're like this, and they're all over the place and they're not stable, there's not that much point doing it. Because you're creating bad patterns, bad motor patterns. We want to make sure that we get them so that they're doing it right. So the hope today is sort of to be like, the drills that you're all doing, are we focusing on the right things? Are we noticing the areas of weakness? And are we able to make simple, very easy, teachable moments? And that's the goal. It's not to sit them down and say, hey, we have to fire this muscle after this muscle after that muscle, keep your chest here, arms here, all this stuff. It's literally a sentence or less. If you're speaking more than about 10 words, you're speaking way too much from a technical standpoint. Okay, perfect, that's great. So then you would have them go backwards as well. The moment you put them backwards, they all fall over. Okay, we know that. That their ability to balance in that backward plane is very, very challenging. The reason being they've never done it. There's not many exercises these days where they're taught how to jump backwards. However, what do we do in tennis most of the time? We've got to do this. A lot of baseline points are this type of movement. So it's a big reason why when an athlete gets pushed back, any of those type of V movements or just anything behind the baseline, they struggle a little bit, is because they're not comfortable moving backwards. And it's not moving backwards to play defense necessarily, it's moving backwards to get set so that then they can transition their way forward. So doing things like this in a backward motion is really important at the young age. So hopefully as they get better, they get really good at those positionings and they're able to stabilize their body. Perfect. Questions on that? Does that kind of make sense what we're looking at here and how it can be implemented? Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
So from a standpoint of sort of learning how to land, that's really what we've been talking about. Haven't even got into how do we actually move now. So if we get them down, learn how to land, get them comfortable in those positions, then what are we trying to do from a movement standpoint? Trying to get them to accelerate, get them to run. How many of you think your athletes run pretty well? Well, no, 0 hands. If you ever look around this room, Mike said all his athletes run perfectly, which I hope so. But literally, everyone doesn't think their athletes run very well. Is that what we're getting? Is that the consensus?
In the 10 and unders, this is an observation. It's a very small kind of group, but the actual, it appears, at least in the athletes I'm working with, that the girls are running a little better than the boys. Is that common?
Yeah, I think we're going around the country and you're seeing that a lot more, that at that younger age, girls' ability to balance, I think, has a little bit to do with it. They haven't really grown yet. Their Q angle, which is basically the width of their hips to their knee, at that younger age isn't as pronounced as when they go through puberty. So there are some factors there that can allow some of that. And again, I think it's one of those things, it's not a 100% rule, but it's sort of that comparison. Similar to saying that guys typically serve better than girls. You know, it's not 100% rule, and it's not necessarily needs to be that way long term, but it's one of those things that when you take a mass sample, you kind of see that.
More girls will be more cautious than boys. So they're gonna, boys are gonna run as fast as they can, not carry that balance when they finish. So it's gonna be more difficult for them to split up and then get started.
And your point there, I don't know if you all heard that, but girls in a lot of ways are sometimes more cautious. Guys are a little bit more crazy with how they move. They're just trying to get from A to B as fast as possible, and if they fall over, they're not that concerned about it. That's part of it as well. There's the recklessness to how they move.
I would say girls color inside the lines, guys just want to get it done so they get out.
Yeah.
So,
I think, again, in general, we're talking generalities here. So you have to be careful with generalities because they are true, but everyone here's got those outliers that don't fit that as well. So we have to adjust our coaching and our teaching to the outliers as well. And that's the challenging part of it, because it would be real nice for everyone if we could all print off a sheet and say, guys do this, girls do this, when you're 8 you do this, when you're 9 you do that. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that easily. Or fortunately, because otherwise we'd all be out of a job. If it was that easy, none of you would be in business. So from that perspective. But let's talk a little bit about what are we trying to do with running. Does someone want to come out and help me? There's some fun things we can do here. All these people. We're coaching. We have to feel comfortable being able to demonstrate. Seriously. Part of the goal of being a coach.
that's right.
Part of our role is we don't have to do it necessarily perfectly, but we have to be able to demonstrate most of these movements. We don't feel comfortable demonstrating it. How do we expect our athletes to pick up on the visual cues? Because we know that a lot of them are visual learners, so you don't have to necessarily be perfect at it, but you can't tell them, hey, do this without giving them some visual awareness. So one of the big things is, as much as you can, try to practice on yourself and know that you may not do it perfect because your flexibility is probably not very good, and a lot of your strength is not very good. So with those two things, it makes it real hard to demonstrate perfectly. But it's still something that it makes us all better coaches if we work through the demonstrations.
Mark, can I just add? It's actually a good thing if you do it badly, or not badly, but not perfectly, and admit that you're not perfect, and therefore you're going to learn with them. Let's see if we can all get better at running this semester, because I'm not perfect either. And actually, motivation for the kids then, when we're all doing it together, much bigger.
It's a huge point. We're all in this together. So from a standpoint of how do we teach running, unfortunately we shouldn't have to do this, If all the kids were playing when they were young and running around 6-8 hours a day, jumping in trees and doing all this stuff, they learn how to run. You go to some of these countries, and I've been fortunate to travel quite a bit and go to different environments, and these kids that have never had a formal lesson of tennis or athletics or speed and agility training or any of this run perfectly. And they've grown up and they've just grown, and they've got tackled, they've fallen down, they've figured out what works, what doesn't. Unfortunately, we don't live in that environment these days. So you're getting a lot of these people at 7, 8, 9 years old who don't know how to do any of that, and never will unless we help them, because of the bad patterns that they've got into and the inflexibilities that they have as well. So one of the ways to start with is actually to start with arms first, which is different because we think, okay, running's on your feet, but in general, we have to get their upper body to know what it's doing before we can really get the legs, because the legs are a lot bigger, they're a lot more complicated movement. If you look at the running stride, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Whereas with the arms, we can keep it pretty simple. So we want to teach the arms first. There's a lot of ways to teach it, but one of the easiest ways is to take the legs out of it. So if we do this, we'll sit on the ground, and all you're going to do is get them to, again, this track and field sprinters do this in their 20s. This is not something that is just for a beginner. This is something that happens over time and it needs to be repeated. So what we're going to do, we're going to sit on the ground. You can stand up, take a look at what we're going to do. So we're going to be here. You've got to work on posture. So a couple things here. Core tight. When you hear that term, what does that mean to most of you? Suck it in, maybe. So we've got to be careful because we take simple terms as cueing devices, but athletes may look at that very differently to what we mean. Suck it in is correct if it's done right. It's similar to take your racket back. When you say take your racket back, it sounds like a good cue. It could be here, it could be here, it could be here, it could be there. That's all take your racket back. So we have to be careful with what cues we give them. So we want to make sure when we say, suck it in or core tight, you're not trying to get them to suck the belly button in all the way to the spine to the point where their stomach goes inwards and it concaves. We don't want that because then they can't breathe properly. What we just want them to activate the core. So basically one thing is get their diaphragm, so that you wouldn't use that term, you'd say just, okay, try to raise your chest up a little bit. By raising the chest up a little bit, the core tightens. You feel that? Raise your chest up, core tightens. Okay? Real simple term. Usually they can understand what that means. Just raise your chest up, and that gets them in a good posture. Second thing is, and he's doing a great job here, is you want their shoulders back. Because a lot of the time they're going to be rounded like this. We don't want that position. We want shoulders back. Shoulders back and head straight. Again, how do we cue that? You don't want to give them too much information. But the first time they do it, you have to make sure you know how to get them in the right position. If you've got a big group, it's a little bit more challenging. It can be done though quite well, where you line them all up like this, and you walk behind them and you just tap them. And you just say, shoulders back, and just give them a tap so they know what you mean by shoulders back. So then in the future, when you say shoulders back, they know what you mean. So the first couple of times you're with an athlete, your purpose isn't so much to teach them what you want them to know that day. It's you want them to learn your language, whatever your language is. So when you say it in the future, they know what you mean, and you're both on the same page. Because that's where most teaching sort of breaks down. We say something, they interpret it very differently to what we meant. And that's our fault. We didn't do a very good job of coaching. So we need to understand the difference between what we say and what they interpret. So shoulders back, good, it's great posture. So legs are straight, right here. So now what you're going to do is you're going to start them, try to sort of elbows by the side. Okay, elbows by the side. But the moment you do that, they tense up. First typical thing we see with most athletes is they'll tense up here. The traps will tighten up. So they'll do that because you said arms by the side. You want their arms by the side, but you want them relaxed up here. So again, a few ways to cue that. The easiest is just touch and say relax. Most of the time they kind of get that feeling. If they don't, which some kids won't, especially when they're doing something for the first time, then you have to walk through some different patterns of how to get them to relax. So one is relax here. The other is tell them where to tighten. Because if we tell them where to tighten, then everything else relaxes. So we say there's a muscle down back here that we want them to tighten. So you tap there and you say tighten. And if they tighten there, they will relax up there. So it's sort of reverse teaching. Instead of telling him to relax a muscle, we're telling him to tighten something else so that everything else should relax because they're focused on tightening one muscle. So, how's that feel? It's not so easy just to hold that position.
You know what, right here starts.
Yeah. Did you guys hear that?
That's good, that's good.
So, I don't know if you all heard that. It was a really important point. The hip flexors
Yeah,
here
right here.
tightened up.
Yeah.
It felt like maybe a little cramp was coming
Yeah,
on.
exactly.
So,
Put another beer from last night.
yeah, that's not uncommon. At a young age, it's less of an issue, but once they get to puberty and beyond, it becomes a real problem. But that also tells us our athletes' hip flexors are tight, and that's why you need flexibility. They need to be doing their dynamic warm-up. They need to be doing their post-activity stretching. You need to encourage that from day one and tell them why. So when they do say, hey, I'm getting a little tight here, what's going on? Hey, this is why, and this is why we're doing these other exercises or drills to help with that. So once we get the arms here, okay, real simple, you want a 90-degree angle here. Again, this is for us. You're not telling your athletes any of this. You're using language appropriate to them. But from our standpoint, we need to understand what we're trying to teach you. So elbow 90 degrees. All we're going to do now is there's a couple kind of cues here. You want their fingertips to be relaxed because we don't want them to tense up. So basically, there's a few ways you can do this. You can just tell them to press index finger against the thumb. It's a way to get them to relax a little bit. And then all they're going to do is they're going to take their arm to their nose, in line with their nose. So they're there. And then the other arm, and they're going to come back. So, and now we're going to get into running form. So we're going to have one arm here, one arm there, and then we're just going to switch. Good, and again, a little bit more, a little bit further back. So again, each time we just want them to come back a little bit further. So all we're trying to do now is try to see what's natural for them. Okay, so he's very stiff and very controlled because we put him in an unusual environment. What we want to get to the point is this becomes natural and it looks like a good running motion, but it's not going to happen immediately. So all we're going to do now is usually, and he's doing a great job of demonstrating, he's got a little bit of a chicken wing going on here, which is good because this is what you see a lot. So we want to keep the elbow close to the side. There you go. So you want to make sure that you give him a cue to help him keep it close to the side. And then we start going and bringing this elbow in here closer. Good. So now the reason is, once we do all this, is we want to make sure that we don't lose energy. This is the whole purpose of this. We want to keep everything close to our body. We want to keep very short lever. So notice that there's no real movement at the elbow. So it's all coming from the shoulder. Go ahead. Try to bring this closer to your head. There you go. Okay, so now even closer. Yeah, good. Okay, so now we're looking pretty good, huh? We're starting to see mechanics that look where we want to get to. Okay, now let's do it a little bit faster. Yep, pretend you're running now. Good, good. Now you've kind of taught them into a position of efficiency. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to get them efficient. Nice, how do you feel?
Good.
Okay. Okay, relax. So bend your knees, relax up. So you understand what we tried to do there. That can be done very quickly, and not every athlete's going to need a lot of cueing. A lot of them may do it naturally, but if they don't, you want to see what's the normal issues. The normal issues is elbow comes out to the side, arms are too far out in front. Okay, those are the two most common things that you'll see, and then their weakness in their core.
Yeah, my daughter suffered a stress fracture this year, cross-country running, and I went to see the orthopedic. And I love this lady, she's probably almost 60. But one of the things she mentioned to her is, of course she mentioned posture first, which, you know, girls at 15 to posture, and talked to her about that. But then she mentioned, and kind of hit me, she said Kenyan runners, if you watch the runners, it's so core driven, and it's so light when they hit. And this might be simplifying things, but a lot of our tennis players, when we're doing our drills at the end or fitness related type stuff, they sound like elephants on the court. Is it something as simple as being lighter on our feet? I mean, we've heard that forever, but is there something we can have them focus on? Okay, when you hit, let's lighten that foot, because then the core will be engaged. I mean, is that oversimplifying, or is that something to be looked at?
No, it's not oversimplifying at all. That's what you want them to do. The sort of elephant sound that you hear is a huge warning sign to you that they're doing things wrong. Because what does that mean? That means that their entire foot is hitting the ground. You know, so they've got their entire foot hitting the ground. They're spending way too much time on the ground. That's really what that sound tells us. Okay, so what we want is we want short, quick ground contacts. Remember, our goal when we're running is to develop power. And what's the definition of power?
Speed plus strength.
Yeah, speed plus strength, or yeah, exactly. So what we're trying to do is trying to move at force times velocity, if we want to use the real physics term, but it's the same thing. So what we're trying to say is how much force can we develop in the ground in the shortest amount of time. That's it, period. So the shorter you can spend on the time while developing good amount of force, the heavier you're going to be. And then that's the simple way. What happens though is even if you do that right, you can still not be as fast as you should be because your mechanics, once you transition the force, aren't very good. So you could be great here, but then your knee bows out, means energy's going that way. Your hips roll in or out, so the energy's shifting. Your core twists as they run, so they're not running straight, they're running like this, so energy's going here and there. And then their arms start going, doing all this stuff, so the energy's out. So you could be great with your athlete pushing into the ground, but then they lose 50% of their energy by inefficiencies all the way up the chain. So understanding that and being aware of that's pretty important. And then how do we fix it is the most important question. So that's coming down to these efficiencies. But yeah, when you look at your athletes doing the drills, the question that you brought up with, you know, do they want to be light on their feet? They want to be light, but they want to be powerful. And that sometimes people say, okay, how do you do both? How do you be light and powerful? And when you turn the term light, is not so much, there's no force being produced, you're not tiptoeing around like this. You're actually driving into the ground, pushing hard, but it's quick, it's like that. Okay, so down and up, down and up. And that's what we want to do. Like if you, like everyone else, we want to learn from the best. Fastest people in the world, the 100-meter sprinters, watch how they do and how short their time is on the ground. Their ground contacts are very, very short. Their flight times are really long. But again, be careful when we're watching stuff like that, because in tennis, we're only concerned about the first couple of steps in a 100-meter race, because tennis players don't run over 10 meters ever in one direction. So we don't need to get our athletes in full striding positions like someone running. And that's a big concern. If you send out a lot of your athletes to people that maybe do some of this stuff, be aware and ask them, okay, so we're training tennis players here, correct? This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop tennis athletes, and we understand that we want to get them fast in 10 meters or less. All that other stuff that you do for other sports that run 40, 50, 60 meters, it's not very relevant for us, and actually it can cause us problems. Because how many of you have taken your athletes to a track and had them run, and then they have a hamstring problem or they have a lower back problem? And part of that reason is they're not used to those full mechanics. So we have to understand why are we training our athletes and what are we doing it for. Okay, let's take it back to running form. So you guys were pretty good on the arms, kind of simple exercise that can be done, but again, what are we curing? Okay, now let's look at the legs. Let's come over here to the wall. So if you can't see us here, stand up. We'll do some wall drills here, which are real simple to do. You can do them on the fence, so you can line up 20 athletes, 30 athletes, do them all at once. And the kids usually really like this because they see and they feel a tangible sort of benefit immediately. So what we're going to do, we're going to face the wall actually. So I'm going to demonstrate for us so you get a feel for what we're trying to do. So here we're trying to get at our positioning. So we want pretty much a acceleration lean or a 45-degree angle lean. We want our shoulders back in this position. We want our core tight, what we talked about earlier. And the only other thing here is we want to slightly squeeze our glutes. So you know when you say squeeze the glutes, what's a cue that you can give your athletes to make them understand what that means? Anyone use that term? Buttocks, yes. But how do we get them to squeeze it the right way? Because if you say squeeze your butt, what does that mean? I'm not sure if they understand that. Yeah? So yeah, think about tell them, hey, we've got a quarter for you, and you've got to try to squeeze it and hold it in place. That's usually a visual that they can understand and that they can relate to. Except if you're international. Okay, so we've got this position in here. So glutes tight, core tight, shoulders back, nice length. Okay. With a deficient athlete or an athlete that has very poor posture or body control, just holding that for 45 seconds is going to be a challenge. Notice here we've got a little curve here. We want to avoid that. So try to, there you go, straighten up, good. So if you get that lumbar, it's basically a lordotic curve. We don't want that in this position. We want to straighten them out. And again, I'm talking to you guys aren't going to use terms like this with your athletes, but you want to understand the right positioning. So once they get in the right positioning, how you feel? Yeah, no problem. You hold that all day? Good. Yep, feet are good. So again, you want to just be pretty close in here because what we're doing is stabilizing. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to get this leg to come up into about a 90-degree position. Yep, there you go. And a couple things we focus on here. Maintaining posture, keeping the heel underneath the hamstring, and pressing the toe up. So like that. Good. So now he's holding this position. Core tight, come on. He's starting to break. Straighten out. There you go. How you feel? Good. He's doing good. So posture, pretty good. Hold that position. Real simple. Okay, very, very, very simple. You just want them to hold that. Because if they can't hold that position, how do we get them to run and put pressure into the ground? That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to see, can they hold the position? Is there enough stability there that they can hold it? Okay, good. Relax. So, very, very simple. You do the same on both sides. For the benefit of time, we'll just sort of focus on this side right now. Okay, so now we'll get them up in this position. Let me demonstrate one thing. What we're going to do next. They're going to be in here, in this position. And all we're going to do is we're going to teach them how to push into the ground, how to generate force into the ground. So from here, all we're going to do is drive down hard, push off, and as they land in the ground, the momentum's going to bring both feet off the ground. And why do we do that? Is because if we just do this a lot, it puts a lot of strain through the lower back. At a young age, it's not as important because they're not putting that much force into the ground. But as they get older, we don't want them just pushing all that force into the ground, going all the way up our lower back. So from here, they're going to be in this position here, and then they're going to drive and jump. So it's here. See how the foot comes off? See that? Okay, so we'll try that. Again, all we're trying to teach them here is how to put force into the ground. Real simple. Real difficult to do. Okay, but all in one motion. So you're pausing at the bottom. Yeah, go. Yeah, there you go. A little bit closer in. In more. There you go. Good. Okay, good. Toes up. Toe up on the right. Toe up.
Oh, yeah.
Point. Yeah, there you go. Now, why did I say toe up? Keep doing a couple more. Okay, relax. So the reason I said toe up is a real simple point. It's again, becomes technical. Why do we have the toe up versus the toe down? Anyone know? Yeah, so exactly. You're trying to store energy here that you can then drive into the ground. If your toes down, we can't press into the ground very well. We have to then rise it up and then push it down. So if the toes up, you have a stiffness here that you can push off. And that's what we're trying to do. So push. That's the goal. Again, these are simple points, but most people don't focus on them. And again, all this has come from track and field. This is not tennis specific. This is athlete specific. We're trying to develop an athlete to run faster. That's all it is. So
How many times a day?
yeah, how many times do they do it?
How many reps?
Yeah. So I don't know if you heard that. How many reps do you do? So you don't do any more than 10 on each leg, because the goal here is not to fatigue. You want them to generate force. You want them to be powerful. You want them to be fast. You want them to be stable. The moment they start fatiguing, you shut it down. You say, okay, we'll go to the next drill, next exercise. If you're doing this in a circuit and you've got a big group, you've got to be careful, because this is not the type of drill where you just kind of let them do reps. It's not a conditioning drill. You know, it's a very technical drill. Similar to when you're teaching strokes, if they're not getting something and they're getting worse and worse at it, you're not going to continue to push them through something if they're breaking them down completely because of fatigue.
Could you use as a part of the dynamic warm-up?
Exactly. This is the best time to do something like this when they're fresh. The earlier in the day, the better. And again, this is something that needs pretty good oversight. So you want to make sure that you don't do this if you've got way too many people that day and they've never done it before. So these are the type of things you want to do in smaller groups, early. But once they get comfortable with this, once they've done this for 5 or 6 times, they know what they're doing. So you can have a large group doing it. So one of the recommendations when you're doing technical work, say with tennis, is do that smaller 4 or 6 person kind of coaching. Could be a minute only, but break away a small group, teach them the skill that they need, put them back into the bigger group, and make sure that they kind of get their questions answered. So we're not just going about it in a haphazard way. We want to make sure that the athletes get better. So let's do that again. So there's a couple of things I want to just highlight. And this is, you're going to see this a lot. Watch his core. So a little bit closer. There you go. Good. Knee up. Watch when the core, when he's in this position, he does a really good job. When he does quicker, watch what happens that his core wants to break. You can't allow that to happen. Get back down. Now do it full speed. Yep. Okay, core tight, shoulders back. A little slower. Like quicker on the movement, but slower in between. No. You do quick all the way, but kind of pause about 5 seconds between each rep. So go real quick, and then pause, reset. Quicker. Yep, good. Pause in between. Good. Okay, why do I want a little pause in between? Because you want to reset posture. You don't want them to go through bad mechanics.
Yeah.
Good. Nice. Okay, relax. Good job. Okay, so that's getting us developing that motion that we want. The next step of this is, how do they do it when they push and then they land on the other leg? So what I mean by that is here. So all we're doing now is doing foot strike and switching our hips. So we're just trying to teach them to position themselves appropriately. You understand that if we just say, okay, go run. Okay, we're going to improve running by run. That's not necessarily possible. We just say, because you've seen that, most of your kids that are 13, 14 that you've had for a while, they run every day. They warm up, they run doubles line to doubles line. They're running, but they're not getting any better. Part of the reason they're not getting better is because they're not focusing on some of these things. So let's go ahead. Knees up, toes up. Get set. Go quick. You got to go quick between. Okay, so you're sort of walking. This is a walking drill right now. Switch. Fast. Okay, relax. So let me demonstrate again. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift. So it's here. So here. So real quick. So as this comes down, this comes up.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Good. There you go. Good. Notice the difference there? The first was a walk where they were both kind of going. Here it's happening as one comes down, the other one goes up. So again, we're trying to work on their ability to go from here to push. This is why we're doing this. It's that split into that first step. That's what we're trying to develop there. Okay, once they get good at this is not easy. This usually will take a little time. Then we go into a run. So it's here. Okay, so try that. This he'll break down, I guarantee you. Go ahead. Good. Okay, notice how the hips are starting to rise a little bit. Try to keep them lower. Good. Good. This is real tough on the young kids. So this is not something you would do in the first week or even the first month usually. This is something that over time they do. You typically aren't going to do that for more than 5 seconds. So once they get real good, and they can do that as fast as they can for 5 seconds, then you know you've got an athlete that can run. I don't even have to see them running properly. You can tell from these drills who can run, who can't, where their limitations are. So this gives us very, very quick, easy ways to train an athlete on how to move their limbs better. That's all we're trying to do. Make their limbs more efficient in the way they move. Okay, so questions on that?
Are you looking at this as being a remedial thing or a developmental thing?
Development.
Okay, in which case, at what point are we saying that, at what age are we saying this would be appropriate in the under 10 space? And at which age are we saying running style is set and we can make an evaluation if we need to, whether we need to or not?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good point. I don't know if you all heard that down here. Mike asked, so is this developmental or remedial? And the answer is that it's developmental, it's for everyone. The second question was, at what age sort of do you feel the athletes are maybe able to put it all together and where this becomes an efficient sort of evaluation tool? And based on where it came from, which is track and field, I stole all this from track and field, this is not my ideas. They do it at 4, 5, 6 years old. So it's doable. The question is who are more successful? It's like everything else we teach. You have the athletes that do it really well. You have the athletes that really struggle. But it's something that we want to implement as young as possible because we're asking them to run on a daily basis. I mean, they're having to run and move every day that we work with them. So there's no reason they can't do these exercises. They may not have great core control, and they won't, a lot of them, so they may start twisting early, but that's great because then we can work on it. They may have a tough time of sequencing the legs together, you know, the coordination component. So that's why you may not take them to that third level. The first level, the posture, they should be able to do. Every person should be able to hold themselves there for 30 seconds. The next step is holding them in that position. That's going to be hard for a lot of them when they're young, just stabilizing in that position. Once they're good at that, then we position. So I guess a quick answer to that is as young as possible, but you know they're going to have limitations as we go through. That's why the progressions are so important. Same way with when you teach, you have progressions, because not everyone can do everything, but our goal is to get them to that end game. And if we don't know where that end game is, why are we doing what we're doing? And if we're just there doing a drill because you saw it and you thought it was a good drill, that's only going to get you so far. Then what happens when you see the next good drill? You move over to that drill just because it's a drill. But if we have a framework of, okay, we're trying to progress them here, 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 the drills become complementary instead of opposing.
In terms of like children at a very young age, is it something like, for instance, in soccer, you have those quick bursts, okay? Is at a young age, if I'm in another country, whatever, and we're just playing soccer, is as I'm chasing that guy, do I start to develop some of these things on my own in order to create more speed to be able to chase this guy down?
Yeah, 100%. It's that learn by doing model, which is the best model if we can do it. Unfortunately, it's not set up that way anymore, where they learn how to get faster because they're chasing someone who is faster and it makes them faster. That's ideally the best way for them all to learn. The problem is we don't create the environment enough where they can do that. So we want to continue that. And these drills are not an hour worth of drills. This is not this training session. This is the warm-up. This is 3-4 minutes of a circuit. The rest of the time they're doing these game-based activities where they're playing tag, they're chasing each other, they're doing running races, they're doing all those things. But if they only do those with deficiencies, which most of them have, they're going to get better, no doubt, but they're still going to have some of those deficiencies. The goal of some of these exercises we're doing today is to offset that and make sure that they're not having these deficiencies as much going forward. So it's this hybrid system. Ideally, the learn by doing is the best way, but we don't have enough time usually. The athletes aren't spending 4 or 5 hours a day playing anymore, so they're not learning it in those environments. So some of this is sort of trying to account for that.
How would you answer if someone is weaker or has a less efficient, stride? When you get them stronger and more efficient, is there potential for 10% or 20% or improvement in speed? How would you answer that?
Yeah, more. 200, 300, 400% improvement if you do it right at the young ages. So again, at that point, it's not going to be that much, but when they get older and older, it becomes huge. At the young age, you're going to see a huge improvement. Let's say, do you guys do a 20-meter sprint test? Let's say baseline to the opposing service line. Has anyone done that test? Just a straight ahead 20 meter sprint. So you're on the baseline of one side of the court, you're on the service line of the next, they run on the side of the net post, that's 20 meters. So how much time can you improve there? And you can improve easily 10 to 30% within a month or two of doing right movements. They're not stronger, you know, they're just more efficient. It's technical improvements. Same way when you teach them how to hit a forehand. If they've got a major hitch in their forehand and their contact point's wrong, okay, they're going to hit it X miles an hour. You fix those two things in 5 minutes with some drills, they hit the ball 10 miles an hour harder. You all of a sudden became a great coach. And they're not any stronger, they're not any more flexible. You've just made them more efficient in their technique. It's the same concept with movement. It's the exact same thing. It's how do we get the most amount of power from the athlete and not lose the energy as the energy is transferred from the ground up.
I assume these activities are okay for 11 to 14-year-olds.
Yeah, there's nothing we've done here today that is risky, that potentially has issues. It all comes down to when you do these, how much resistance are you potentially going to put? Because once we do these drills with people that are stronger, we start adding all sorts of resistance. So you can do wall drills with resistance, you can do some of these things with weight, with bands, with this or that. So the progression comes as the athlete can handle the face body weight stuff.
What about adding a rack in their hand?
Yeah.
Doing that?
For which one?
I don't know, just explain the process of that guy running with that rack in his hand.
Yeah, I mean, on the wall it's challenging because they're in that position. But in general, yeah, having the racket in the hand when they're doing movement type drills is always beneficial because that's the environment they need to run. But the challenge becomes is the moment you put the racket in the hand, they're focusing a bit on the racket. So we've got to make sure that it doesn't offset all the good benefit you're trying to do with making them more efficient. So you need that balance of when do you put the racket in, and a lot of the time it's a bit of both. Similar to medicine ball training, if any of you do that with your athletes, don't just do it at the end of practice, do it during practice. You hit for 5 minutes, working on rotation, working on loading, then you do 5 medicine ball throws, and then you go back to hitting. Same thing with some of this, is it's not one or the other, it's this hybrid approach to, we want to develop athleticism, but we're also developing tennis players. So just developing athletes is one thing, and we can do that, but there's plenty of great athletes that can't move on a tennis court. You get 100, you get Usain Bolt, every single one of you move better than he does on the tennis court. I guarantee you that right now. Doesn't mean he's not a great athlete. It just means he hasn't got the movement patterns, he hasn't got the coordination that he needs for tennis. So we need to always keep in mind what's our purpose. Athleticism is huge. So I think everyone agrees that we need to develop that. Don't develop that without keeping in mind that we're still trying to make tennis players.
These are some great exercises. And you talked about when you expect to see maybe some improvement and how much. But can you talk a little bit about if you've got a situation where you got 2 athletes? You got one athlete that comes to the academy 5 days a week, and you got the other athlete that comes 1 day a week. So how can you address that if you see where they need this type of approach to that parent, to that athlete, as to how they can expect to see that improvement and how long it might take?
Yeah. No, it's like everything else. If they spend more time doing it, they're going to get better. And I think that's the messaging you have to send is it's all a ability of doing it effectively, and hopefully all of us in here make use of every minute that we have with the athletes. But the more time they spend on these, especially technical components, the better the improvements are going to be. So we have to convince them that the more time they do this, the better they're going to get at it. It's like every other skill. And there's no simple way to do that. It's one of those things, you want to be doing these at least 2 to 3 times a week. If you're doing them once a week, it's very hard to make big improvements. So if they're just coming and doing these once a week, it's like every other thing. If they only hit a tennis ball once a week, they're not going to get that much better. They're going to get better, but it's not going to be to the point where they're going to be a national level player in a couple of years playing once a week. So we have to understand who are they, what are their goals. If they really want to improve fast and well, they're going to need to put the time in. Just treat it like every other skill. Every other skill that you could communicate it, their academics, their ability to do chores or skills around the house or hobbies, music, takes time. It wasn't the answer you wanted, but I think it's the only real answer I can give.
What do you suggest in terms of like, one of the problems we have is we do the dynamic, we do some bands at the end of practice and stuff, changing the mindset of the parents. I mean, for some reason, they think the last 15 minutes, the band work is not accomplishing, okay, oh, I'll just pick my kid up early. You know, we'll let that 15 minutes work on the homework. And there's some way, as tennis professionals, we've got to be able to change the mindset of, this is where it is nowadays. I'm sorry, we're not just teaching your kid to hit a cross-court forehand anymore. Okay, we have to develop you as an entire player. Does it need to come from, I mean, and I guess Julio saying yesterday, meeting with the parents and talking with them, I guess that's one way, having more meetings with them. But I guess as an entire group.
I think part of an easier solution than that is, instead of segmenting how you structure everything, is combine it all. If it's all combined, then there isn't this or that. It's all one program. And it comes down to your program design. Especially in the 10 and under space. These areas cross over so much that they are one and the same. So movement training, technical training, strategy, all of that on a 10 and under environment needs to be combined. And I think that takes care of a lot of that issue. If you segment it where they are obviously different parts, then that tells them that there's maybe different worth or different value, which at the younger ages we understand the athleticism piece is probably more important than anything else. We want to make sure that the basic technique of the stroke is down, but if they're not getting those reps on the athleticism piece, we're missing the opportunity that we're not going to be able to make up when they get older. So I think it comes down to, you know, really informing the parents that this is a holistic approach. And I think it helps all of you, because all of you are the leaders sort of in this area, that's why you're here. But it separates you from all the other coaches that are out there. If you say, hey, our program is truly a holistic approach to developing the athleticism for young tennis players.
With the whole notion of, creating myelin and neural pathways, how specific do you find yourself in, when it comes to groups? Is it possible that you can be very specific in a group situation because you're trying to create that habit creation over and over again, getting the right neural pathways?
Yeah, so let me see if I understood what you were getting at. Like in a group setting, can you deliver enough information effectively to make it specific for each person in the group?
Yes, and as a group in general, like if you're just working on landing, how specific are you? Because sometimes I find myself to be very OCD about how to land. And so I just want to know how you deal with it. What do you find more effective?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. Group training is really easy if you don't care about the kids. It's the easiest thing to do if you don't care, because they all do kind of their own thing and they're just out there. Most of you guys care about every kid and you want every kid to get better and well structured. So you have to position yourself, and I think there's a lot of phenomenal people that do a great job of really focusing on the groups and how each kid can get that individual attention, but they're never going to get as much individual attention as a one-on-one session. So what you need to do is you need to figure out how those first few sessions with the kid is done so that your cues, they understand. And some of the best ways to do it is to have your sort of top 10 or top 20 comments that you say, that every kid knows what that means. So when you say core tight, they know what that means. You don't have to explain it ever. They get that, they know it, they understand it. When you say racket back, they know what that means. You have these cues, so when you're working with large groups, when you say a word, every one of those kids knows what it means, and then they're all getting specific information. You may not be saying it to the entire group, but you're walking behind or you're walking in front of someone, and you tap them and you say core tight, or you say racket back. That's the way to be specific in large groups, but it takes a little front-end work to make sure that they're educated about what the terms mean. Because one of the biggest problems we all have is we say things that we totally understand, it makes 100% sense, but they interpret it completely different, or they have no idea what you're talking about. And especially at the younger ages, that's a big challenge. And for me, that's a challenge, because a lot of the time I speak with academics and using huge words, and no one understands what they're saying. They're just trying to use bigger words to confuse each other. And then you come down and you work in this younger space, and you have to avoid anything more than about 4 letters. So it's a completely different environment, and many of you are the same. You may work with adults that want to know, they always keep asking why am I doing this, why am I doing that? And you're trying to explain it in the best way you can. So we have to sort of change the way we approach it. And there's some true experts in here that do it a lot better than I do about how to communicate the right way. But the biggest thing is, are the cues used correctly? And you can definitely make huge improvements in group settings. So I don't feel like doing group work is a negative. The higher level players that you have, you definitely want some individual time. It could be within a group setting where you take them out for a minute or two and you put them back in and you work it that way. But it's one of those things that you can get a lot accomplished in a group setting.
Yeah, I just want to say before you mentioned force, so following sports time velocity, and emphasize the importance of short contact time. It's pretty much the same in serve, and so maybe you should share a little bit more about that, because most of the work is performed without the waist and not enough below the waist.
No, it's true. I mean, with strokes in general, I think a lot of us historically are focused on contact. I mean, that's where the eyes go. They go at contact, and contact is predominantly upper body, because contact here, that's contact. The thing is, for us to get to contact effectively, our lower body's the driver, and yet not enough people focus on the importance of lower body and the rotation, whether it's the serve or the ground strokes. Remember, everything we do comes from the ground. Without the ground, we couldn't hit a tennis ball. So if we're not embracing the ground and the transfer of energy up through the chain, we're missing where the force and where the power is coming from. So don't forget about the importance of lower body from stroke mechanics. It's where everything comes from.
Does surface matter at this age in terms of more of the pounding?
Yeah, I mean, the softer the surface, the better. I mean, if you can do it on grass, if you can do it on rubberized surfaces, please don't unnecessarily load them on hard courts as much as possible. If you've got grass behind the court, do a lot of the running and jumping stuff out now. So yeah, it's better at this age because the loading isn't as bad because they're younger. But the more you can do it on softer surfaces, the better. As they get a bit older, if you're working with older players, which most of you do, if you can do some things in the pool occasionally, it's really beneficial. Some of the mechanic stuff that we do, like that power drills, do that a lot in the pool. You go into an end where they can still stand, but the water's up basically at least to waist level or even higher, and you can do a lot of these movements. So you're teaching technique without the pounding as much. So there's some benefits there. So yeah, as much as possible, unloading them, so putting them in environments where you can still get the work done, but you can unload them is huge. Because as they get better and older, the pounding only increases.
When did you recommend to start using the resistance band that you put on the waist when you're doing the exercise on the wall with the knees up?
Yeah. Again, I would rarely add resistance to a lot of these tennis players that you work with. If we're staying in 10 and under, never. Resistance is so unnecessary in general at the younger ages because their body control is not there, their strength is not there for them to control their own body weight well enough. So you see this, and it's sad when you see, like I've seen some places where they will have 8, 9, 10-year-olds with bungee tubes on them, and they're running and they're like this, and their technique is horrible, and whoever's got them is screaming at them, that's great, you look phenomenal, and all you're doing is developing bad patterns that is going to hurt them long term because they're pulling the weight the best way they can. The best way is to make yourself shorter and do this because that's where the weight is. So you're going to try to do that movement. That's the slowest. Because one of the things we got to understand with speed is speed and strength are on opposing spectrums. Think about it. When you're trying to lift something really heavy, what do? You squat down, you bring, you you tense everything up and you go and try to lift. Okay, that's strength. Now that's the best way to get strength, is to really load this. When you want to be quick, we want everything to be short as possible and as quick as possible. Think of a figure skater. The quicker they are, they will tapping close, they get really close, short levels. So we have to understand what we're trying to accomplish. And resistance is strength, which is a great thing, but not when we're trying to work on speed until their technique is perfect. So you usually won't use resistance until an athlete's past puberty. And if we do use resistance, it's not for the purpose of resistance, it's the purpose of cueing, meaning that it puts a little pressure on them so that they realize that they should move this way or they shouldn't move that way. So when you may see me use resistance bands with a younger athlete, but it's not for the resistance of putting a lot of resistance on them. It's for cueing them to make sure that they don't move in the wrong pathway. So when they hit a position, there's sort of like a little tug, and it lets them know that, hey, they're going in the wrong direction or they're going too far or something like that. Any questions on some of this stuff? Because we've talked predominantly on movement, and I think we're running short on time. So I'm sure there's some more questions. I'm going to be out over lunch here, so come find me. Also check out the International Tennis Performance Association. A lot of these drills and exercises are available. We've got a great parents guide as well, so for injury prevention for parents. So check out the website, itpa-tennis.org. But come find me at lunch and answer a lot more questions. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to take maybe 10 minutes, a little break here, while we set up Mr. Ozaki and get going.
APC forms, anybody need some? Standard self-work, come and see me.
Yeah.